Thanks. All right. My name's Gregg Simonds, and I was raised in Idaho, and I've been involved in ranching for the past 50 years, and have been an avid skier of all types for more than 60 years. The first time I went skiing, it so impressed me that I dreamt multiple times thereafter. But both of these two things I brought together, because they're both nature-based, and I've and I've really enjoyed the splendor of my life between skiing and ranching. I studied natural resources at Utah State University. I got degrees in range and watershed science. And in 1973, I wrote a personal mission statement that said I wanted to be a positive resource management example, i.e., make money while improving the land. And so, and back in 1973, I'd go to an environmental meeting and they'd walk around me. I'd go to a cattlemen's meeting with that mission statement and they'd walk around me there too. But in 1996, I changed that mission statement to I wanted to help others be positive resource management examples, i.e. why I'm here today. I'm a firm believer that successful management depends on having good people that have accurate and measurable feedback, and this is also foundational to effective marketing. While the protocols like GAAP accounting have provided trusted methods for tracking financial performance, there hasn't been a similarly reliable economic way to measure land conditions. The dynamic nature of ecosystems has often eluded traditional methods of measurement. Our math basically measures dead things very well, but it does not measure life very well. Yet, it's crucial for ranchers and for people of the world to understand the vital signs of Earth's health. Without this knowledge, how can we be sure that our pursuits of profit is both sustainable and synergistic? To bridge this gap, I co-founded a company that uses remote sensing technologies to assess land health changes across vast landscape in detail and can retrospectively assess landscapes over the last 4 decades. These patented technologies have been applied to over 70 million acres in 11 western states. We can measure wildlife habitat, fire threats, carbon sequestration, and other factors that are essential for water security and overall ecosystem health. When I read about this MT 2030, I thought, well, throw my hat in the ring and hopefully some of this stuff might be helpful. So I'm going to show you a video that's actually 12 minutes long about a ranch that I'm actively engaged in since the inception of changing the grazing. Water? So let's see if this will queue up. Is it thinking? Oh, here we go. Let's see, the pointer might need to point to it. Any ideas, people? Oh, my computer's not connected to this. I can't hear very well either. It's on? Oh, it's loading. Great. Well, let me say just a little bit about it. I went here to this ranch after 4 or 5 decades at other ranches around the West. And basically on those other ranches, we've showed that grazing and actually knowing how to graze, which is the most misunderstood thing in the entire world. People think it has something to do with the number of animals, and it has very little to do with that. And what we demonstrated was that if you know how to graze right, then plants and animals are joined like training a world-class athlete, where you train it to work, and then you train it to rest appropriately with water as this essential thing in the background. This thing doesn't look like it's going to work. Anyhow, from that, what's happened over time on these ranches.
If you don't like bugs, don't improve the land because you get a lot of different insects. you start with the little things, and then it keeps growing up and up and up, and then pretty soon you have your mule deer populations are where you want them, and the birds have enough to eat, and sage grouse numbers are flourishing again.
We
Very few people are in control of 350,000 acres.
maybe I better skip this.
You start to see.
Okay, have you skipped it back there, or is it just dying? Help me, talk to me. He muted it? Okay, so basically, on these different ranches, what we did with that mission statement is try to learn how are we going to do this. And the key to it is water. How are you going to get water in the ground? And to have this appropriate tool, the appropriate tool that can manage these landscapes is to use livestock at the scale that 500 million acres of the West is being used. And this livestock, plants and animals co-evolved. But it's not the cow, but it's the how. How do you do this? And like you train a world-class athlete or any athlete, you need to take the beginning capacity of that human or that landscape, and then you disturb it. You don't model coddle it. All land systems have been evolved with big disturbances, but the appropriate rest to recover. And that's where the strength comes. That's how these things become more and more elastic. And so by using that, we have used cattle, and I would have used chocolate-covered grasshoppers if I could have made money on these landscapes. But we use cattle, and we use the right timing to do something. The timing such that, if you can imagine, if I had a house on a hill and I had no water, and I walked down to the stream every day and got my water and went back to the house, basically what that would show over time is I would have a trail with no plants on it. And if the rain comes down, it's going to run over that bare ground area instead of going into it like where the plants are. And if I do that every day for 365 days, walking back and forth, that trail gets more and more incised. But what if I put a water tank by the house? And I had 364 friends come over, and we all went down in one day. And then 364 days it rested. What would the ground look like now between there and the stream? It would have plants on it. Now the timing is, when did I do it? If I did it in the early spring when the ground was muddy, I would even have more effect with my 365 friends than if I did it in December when the ground was frozen. So what we've learned is with those animals, like buffalo did, to disturb it and then rest it. And those muscles get built. By applying that on these ranches, what's happened is the more ground cover, the greater rate of infiltration. It's not the lack of rain, it's what we do as stewards of the landscape to get the rain into the ground. And that's in our case, we use a tool called cattle, and we use that tool to get the disturbance right with the rest right. And if I can't do better than total resting, then you need to kick me off the land. And what we found is that with this grazing principle, we got more water into the ground, and if you get more water in the ground, shit happens, and shit has carbon in it. And what happened too is a whole bunch of co-benefits, like water security. Its quality of water is when is it available and what's in it. And if it goes into the soil reservoir, it gets purified. Part of it goes into the aquifer, part of it's into stream flow for fisheries or whatever, and part of it goes into production that all critters live off of, from insects to animals to cattle. And by getting that water into the ground, then we have green material over time. And if it's in the riparian areas, we go from just a landscape to all these fingers of green, dissecting it off of all these mountains, and we turn it into a lifescape. And that's what this movie's about. In our case, this luscious and nutritional feed changed how many of our cows got pregnant. And then they produce beautiful babies that are beautiful food, but at the same time, they are the trainers that help train the land. And so it's as close to as virtuous and a sustainable cycle, at least a possibility of it, if you actually understand the grazing. And I can tell you that after my 50 years, I know maybe a handful of people that know how to graze. And I can tell you that the basic idea out there that's employed by the Forest Service, BLM, and others in the scientific community have not been able to show what we do, because what we do is like driving a car. We are constantly adapting to continuously changing conditions. Scientific method means that you get a treatment or multiple treatments and then you compare it to a control. Try to use that methodology to drive to grandmother's house. Set your speedometer at 50 miles an hour and maintain that through time in varying conditions. But since it's been hard to research, it's not published. And if you're a BLM or Forest Service person or an NRCS person, you have to have best science. And if you can't publish it, then you're poor, as you as the authorized officer don't have best science. You can't have allotment terms and conditions that reflect the ambient variation. And so it's like going to sea in a boat. You're supposed to deliver all these public goods and services, and you need to cleat down your sail and your rudder in one position as if there's only a 20-mile-an-hour wind from the southeast. And you know how long that would last before you were upside down. And that's why our land is upside down, is because we haven't been able to be adaptive with new principles. Okay, so we've applied those principles on all these landscapes, and it has changed our economics of the ranch. It's changed our water, our number of fish per mile. It's changed our neotrophic birds on one ranch, the number of birds seen in a 24-hour period from 87 to 137. So we made money, we've sequestered water to deliver to communities and future generations, and at the same time we're producing nutritious food. We're touching that trifecta of the values that we need to have going forward with an ever-growing population of people. Okay, on this particular ranch, I went there because it was public land, and people said I couldn't do it on public land. It's 400,000 acres. I lease it. It's in Nevada. And if I could show the film to you, it would show that we healed 140 miles of riparian areas. That's the distance from here to, I don't know, Pocatello. It's not some little section of creek that somebody fenced out. It's everywhere and everything. Changing an endangered species of trout by 6 times. Plus, with our measurements that I'll talk to you about later, it's changed how much carbon we put into the ground, et cetera, et cetera. So we did this on public land just to show that these principles, because I was told, Yeah, you did it on private land. You'll never be able to do it on public land. Okay, that should. So what this film doesn't show, or does show, is that by implementing these practices in 2003, we successfully restored all these miles of riparian areas, the 140 miles, and we did this in the driest state in the nation during the driest 20 years and 1,300 years as suggested by tree ring studies. We did this, like I said, on public land, or largely public land, and when we started, Lake Powell and Lake Mead were full, and now they are highly compromised. Other than our last boost of moisture, or last couple of years, they're at less than 40%. So as we got water in the ground, the water came up in the riparian areas, and we have water table everywhere. We went from one beaver pond to you can't count them. Oh, I don't know if we want to take 12 minutes to go through this, or okay, great. This will give you some visuals. Let's try. Let's see. Yikes.
It's my pollinator. If you don't like bugs, don't improve the land, because you get a lot of different insects. You start with the little things, and then it keeps growing up and up and up, and then pretty soon you have your mule deer populations are where you want them, and the birds have enough to eat, and sage grouse numbers are flourishing again. Very few people are in control of 350,000 acres. You start to see a decision that one person makes that's conveyed to a small crew, then they accomplish it, and you see the results. It just starts to pique your interest.
The building right behind you here, that's where we lived. There were 13 horse mowers at one time, and 2 tractors, and about 5 hay rakes, and a couple buck rakes bunching hay. Yeah, it's me. 1938. Quite an old-time picture. The old stone building back here was built in 1942, and we didn't have running water or electricity here on the ranch until then. Other than that, growing up was about the same, I guess. Getting in trouble, raising hell around the ranch, we were all over the place.
Humans have evolved a lot in our grazing since European settlement here.
I think they just kind of opened the gate and let the cows go out and go wherever they wanted. And cows don't like being out in the heat, just like people, so they'd congregate along the stream course all summer long.
With that, you see these ecosystems start to tip and go down.
That's the picture taken from the dam in the late 1800s.
That's as far back as the late 1800s that it already looked in the condition it's in that photo.
Nobody realized the long-term damage that they were doing.
My name's John Elliott. I recently retired from the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Spent most of my career actually surveying, inventorying, managing lawn and cutthroat trout. I've probably surveyed more lawn cutthroat trout streams in Nevada than anyone, and I've seen the worst and I've seen the best, and this was one of the worst. I actually look back on my old field trip reports. Every recommendation for streams in this basin was improve the habitat by managing livestock better. When the Broughts family came in and Gregg Simonds came in the early 2000s, they took over and I guess they had this goal, this vision of what it could look like, and I think we're seeing that right now.
Yeah, my name's Gregg Simonds. I was raised not too far north of here. In 1973, I was in the College of Natural Resources, and I said I want to be a positive resource management example, i.e. make money while improving the land. Trying to do both at the same time is a lot tougher than trying to do one or the other. In 2003, we did an assessment. We found that the range was run down, and we found that the riparian areas were run down. I knew that if we could change the grazing, the riparian area would change because it has such high potential. It's got so much moisture in the ground that it would show first there.
I'm Jesse Bratz. I'm the manager here at Humboldt Ranch. We've been here, my wife and my family and I, since 2007. Grazing properly is an extremely simple principle. Where do we graze? How long do we graze? Where do we rest? How long do we rest? We look at where did we graze last year, and if we grazed in May and June on the uplands, we need to make sure those plants fully grow back before we go back there. In the riparians, did we have hot season grazing somewhere? And if we did, we need to make sure those plants in that riparian zone fully grow back before we're back in there grazing again.
When I first came here, you could just see a sprig of willow here and there. But because I had 3 decades of other experience doing this, I knew that it would explode. As soon as you could start getting water into the ground, wonderful things happen. Plants start happening, butterflies start happening, your cow herd gets more fertile. You start opening up this landscape into kind of a lifescape.
Whoa, this is actually changing something. And in the case of the riparians, it's changing it quick because there's water in the system.
This stretch of water behind us never had cutthroat trout in it. They couldn't stay in here. The water would get up to 80 degrees. Suitable water temperatures for cutthroat is 60 and below. After 20 plus years of good grazing management, this pool right behind me, we saw 4 or 5 big cutthroat in it.
We're on Fraser Creek here. It's a really small system. We're in the 3rd year of severe drought here in Nevada and most of the West. We are still seeing life and green things growing. We're still having live water on most of these riparians. Places where 20 years ago there would not have been water still running. Agencies have been very supportive, and there's people within the Bureau of Land Management that have seen the results of what we've done and are willing to work with us and say, yes, we like this, this is right, this is what we want to see more of.
And what's really neat about ranching is if you start improving the land's ability to grow life, then that improves the wildlife and the cattle and the fertility of animals and just basically the happiness factor of the landscape.
Most life thrives on diversity. You have these insect layers, and then you have these bird layers, and that just keeps building on itself all the way through. You know, filling these riparians in with willows is just one step in succession, and now beavers come in and it starts to create the next successionary state.
The good thing about the beaver is that they're part of the water security system. The water keeps rising and getting closer and closer to the surface, and so now we have water in places that there wasn't water. Oh wow, there's one of our friends right there.
It's just a whole different operation now that I was used to. Jesse has made improvements here that I didn't think could be made. I didn't think it would ever look that good again. The killing trick in those years. So that's
Having historical perspective through Les and John and Gregg, it drives that point home of this wasn't always like this. This wasn't always better. This didn't have green stuff in it 30 years ago. This was raw and cut bank.
it's an awakening call to see what can happen. Because in those days, you didn't know what it could look like. You thought, well, that's the way it's always looked. That's the way it will look.
There is an immense amount of joy in being tied to a land that is improving. Trying to understand what a person can do within their lifetime to either make change or a difference. People in agriculture are in a very unique position to do it at a really large scale.
It takes a lot of perseverance to get something done like what has happened here. This was not overnight. This was 20 some odd years. If we have more, real success stories like this and get it out there, it doesn't have to be an anomaly. This can happen range-wide. It really can.
When we can start having that freedom to think beyond our own fences and beyond our own paradigms, that's when we're really going to start seeing landscapes change at scale. Through
Yeah, that gives you a little bit of a window into my life over the last 50 years in a way that is more beyond words and you can use your, but didn't that look nutritious enough for you to go out and start foraging? Start and having babies or something or something that happens out there. Anyhow, what was missing from this film? Although our efforts have significantly enhanced carbon sequestration and the co-benefits of biodiversity, wildlife habitat, and most importantly, water security, we have received no direct financial assistance or payment for these values. The landscape carbon market for these values have been corrupted by flawed measurement methodologies that have eroded the trust in measuring landscape carbon. So thus, it's not done much. It's very, very small portion, and why you guys look for more engineered things to do is because of that lack. You can measure that, and there can be a trust in the system. This now can be overcome by things that we've learned how to do. And button. So the carbon credit value development chain is a very long chain between the people that can supply these values versus the resorts. And so there's all these steps and registering, et cetera. You guys probably know more about it than I do. Anyhow, the first thing that has been a problem out in the landscape is being able to measure, and the methodologies that were historically put together for forestry, South Pole, these guys, and written up as this is problematic and has been for Nike, et cetera, is because they really didn't have the ability to measure the dynamics of nature through these small sample plots and counting a tree. But in addition, there's all these other steps, and these people and all these groups basically in there have captured the lion's share of the carbon market. Let's say a ton of carbon's worth 10, 50, or $100. Most of that is gone to not to the people on the landscape. So to overcome this measurement issue that we need to run a ranch for the values that I said our mission statement is about, is basically you have to have a measurement system that can be trusted. And so we had to develop technologies and techniques over the last 30 years to be able to do that. We first started doing that basically to defend ourselves against onerous perceptions about our ranching capabilities and to avoid and be able to go to a court of law. In addition, we wanted to do it to give intrinsic incentive to our people that their time is being spent and it's making these kinds of changes, because all of us know there's a value to beauty and landscape beauty. And so that is a big factor of why we did it. I'm going to show you an example of what we've done technologically and that how we've tied ground sampling, which is very costly and very little amount of spatial information, to remote sensing. And by doing that, we've been able to then leverage the information over time and space at the scales and the relevancy and the cost effect and the precision and accuracy that allows you to really create the trust in the system of what's going on. And so this next slides are going to show you a little piece of how we've done that. And so we've, over time now, over 70 million acres in 11 western states, we've applied this technology to all kinds of people that I'll show later. So here we go. Here's a little stream reach on the ranch, a couple miles. And these black lines are the areas where topographically you can have riparian vegetation. You can have seasonal flooding, and you can host water-loving plants. And those water-loving plants provide these watered areas. Most wildlife, over 90% of them in the West, need these areas to exist. And they allow it to use, on this ranch we have about 2,000 acres of these riparian areas, and we have 400,000 acres of land, but it makes the rest of the land dynamic too. And so what you see on this slide here is these panels show basically before we started our grazing change, 10 years into it, and then another 10 years after that, and what started happening on that land. If this is color infrared imagery, 1 meter color infrared, and so what it does with color infrared, it pops out what's really green and growing. And bright, like in this one, you can see a little bit of bright red stuff here and there. That's all the riparian vegetation there was in the first one. The gray stuff is bare ground or gravel, and the more brownish, reddish stuff is upland vegetation types. And you can see basically that it changed over time significantly. So, excuse me. So what we've done is we've been able to use like facial recognition technology to classify. So just having a picture, like a Google picture or something, doesn't tell you how much and where of different attributes. But through using classification and, say, facial recognition, we can say, oh, this is whatever your name is, and here she is today, tomorrow, and the next day, and what changed in her. And so that now allows you to denote how much it changed, when did it change, by how much, and make some assumptions about was it management or climate that changed it, and or both. And so now you have the information. And so here you have just a regular satellite image or an aerial image, and here's what it, whoops, forget, sorry. So now it's been converted using classification and spectral reflectance into these real simple groups here of bare ground, the yellow, which is very low in carbon, to riparian things, and to vegetation covering this whole area. And because we've tied that, because we've tied this information to hundreds of soil samples, and that sounds like a lot, but compared to hundreds of thousands of acres, we're able to make a correlation between the reflectance that our eye sees visual bands that are about like that. Spectral reflectance from ultraviolet to infrared is like this, and our ability to discriminate what's going on is, just think of how much you know just by looking at red, blue, and green. So this basically allows us to measure what changed, where, by how much, and then we related that to the amount of soil carbon. How'd that get in there? So here over the whole ranch, in simplistic terms, is a pie chart showing before we made the changes. This is how much upland vegetation, or this. Just look at this green area and the yellow area. You can just see how much this green has increased while the bare ground has gone down. The soil organic matter portion has dropped significantly, and the soil organic portion that is high has increased a bunch. So much so that, so we've measured this over time in our management. It's basically that we've improved it by the equivalent of 3,100 tons of soil carbon per year. That might not sound like much, but that's the equivalent of 23 million miles of an 18 mile per gallon vehicle driving per year. And to reiterate, even though we had that benefit, there's not a market for us to capture that benefit because the metrics behind the methodologies have been flawed historically. So what do we, oh, golly, Greggy, you're gonna have to learn. So basically, here it shows us with ranchers. Those ranchers have the land and they have the tools to make the difference. If they then had an incentive to make the difference, which they do not at all, then all of a sudden those same guys that are watching those cattle could be making carbon. And you are a reflection of your incentives. You will do what those incentives, and those guys all of a sudden become the workers to change this 500 million acres of the West in these waterscapes that are at the top end of the system. But basically, our methodologies have been published in peer-reviewed journals. We have patents for what we've done. Most importantly to us, instead of going to peer-reviewed journals, we go to ranchers pay for, or people that are on the ground. That's who we like the validation from, as opposed to going to a journal that somebody's reviewing that they've never been there. And we've done, oh, Eric put that in. I don't know if that number, anyhow, here's a bunch of things that we've done by having that information. You can see all the places, or these are just some of the places that we've done stuff. We've done our work for ranchers, for communities, for TNC, the King Ranch, Turner Ranches, all kinds of other small ranches, the Forest Service, the BLM, researchers, Indian nations, government, state government, and wildlife agencies. We recently now have a large contract with the Department of Defense, and they believe that climate change is a threat accelerant. And it's one of the major things that the Joint Chiefs of Staff have to address. And so they've seen our work, and we now are going down to apply it to one of their 127 installations. So here's my concept. I don't have enough horsepower to really fully engage this. But anyhow, these registries before didn't have valid methodologies. There were some bright people, some notably from Venezuela and other places, that figured out that you have to have remote sensing coupled with ground information. There's now some, just in the last year or two, valid methodologies. When we reviewed the methodologies years ago, we knew they were horseshit. But it doesn't mean that Gold Standard or Vera or those guys knew it. And so those things were applied. It turned out that it's just like, see, if it really doesn't measure it, then you lose trust. When you lose trust, markets fail. And so, but there is now. So, but I had this golden ring. This golden ring, in it is ranchers and resorts. The people who can supply and the people who want. And I think we have a very unique capability and possibility with these mountain, with the MT 2030, in that we have a lot of local land conservancies that are nonprofits. They can be the developer, the monitor, and the broker. They know the communities. There's special advantages maybe for people in this area to work from a tax-free point of view. There'd be money coming into them. They can help mitigate for more and more people coming in by buying more and more open space. They have the professional staff, they have the lawyers, they have administrative capabilities, and they have local control. In that region, we have ranchers, and they're going to know some of those ranchers, but there's broader ones, people that I know that know how to do it. And they could have a real reason to do it. And these resorts are like, they are in a community that's almost like New York City or San Francisco in their connections, and their fintech people, and their legal, and they have all these capabilities that come to these places, and they could weigh in on developing this more virtuous ring of the ability to create climate changes. And now we have them all together. They're in different regions, and basically most of these ski resorts were once ranches. And those guys, and now we can go out to these places. How am I doing? Oh, golly, I keep going to the wrong spot. So, when I put this vision into Chat GPT, and I said, draw me a picture. Sorry, I don't look anything like this guy, but the manager at the Humboldt Ranch does, and he likes to ski too. And it drew this picture, and I'm just going, holy smokes. And because our company, we have trillions of pieces of information, and we've been using AI and neural networking since way before it was cool, because it's the only way to deal with that much information. We're taking it to the next level now. And so here is a QR code basically to that film if you want to watch it again or something. But thank you for your time.
Yeah, I better turn it on. I'll just repeat my question. So I was saying I really like the idea of changing the supply chain for like the issuance of carbon credits for ranching, for instance. And something I'm curious about are what your thoughts on, or how do we break the current supply chain and like entrance into that market who are really just trying to, you know, like those red rings that you highlighted that are people really coming in to try to take market share but not necessarily give back to those communities. So like other than just working on that concept that you showed in the previous slide of that like the sustainable of like the conservation model and then working with like the resorts and the ranchers, like how do we keep the good players in, I guess, and reform that supply chain?
Suggesting an answer to that was that I think with the technologies of remote sensing with ground samples and with the new methodologies, we can have a trusted way to do things. And once that's done, then I believe that the local land conservancy groups, like the ones here around Jackson Hole, and the ranchers that are even in the valley, one of them in the back of the room right now, that's been working on changing their carbon. Anyhow, that those local conservancies can do monitoring, they can do the brokerage, they can do the development plans, et cetera, et cetera. We could probably help them with some development plans or other, but all of a sudden now you have a community event and free riders, and some of the things that Gareth talked, Hardin talked about, where now you have a local responsibility. Maybe I'm not answering your question, but I just think that if we brought it into the local land conservancies, and that the proportion of money now is not with some fintech venture capitalist guy in San Francisco or New York City or the other ones that I know of, but it's there, and that money gets there. I think it gets enlightened by community spirit and community economic. It's almost like eat local kind of a deal. Did I get around to?
I guess part of what I was trying to ask as well is about how I was trying to also get at how do the how the conservancies basically get the resources other than just working with one organization, yours, to have the tools to have that sort of consistent methodology, especially as we're going across the country or to other countries. Like this might work really well in Jackson, for instance, in the surrounding areas, or like Bozeman, for instance, in Big Sky. But then how do we sort of make that accessible, I guess, to a lot of different communities?
The methodologies that I've read recently and even helped participate in developing, I believe, work, and they are adaptable to different areas. They are broad enough to adapt. There's one for wet grasslands, like a riparian area, to shrublands like sagebrush or salt desert shrub. There's there's, like I said, this is just a concept to try to overcome why landscapes are not part of the solution. It's just a concept. I think with all the people that are in a ski town, like guys like this, they can start working the problem. It's so easy for me to wave my arms like, yeah, here's a solution. But the devil would be in the detail. I think with the money in these communities and the spirit of a lot of the money in this community, the problem can be set out, and there could be a whole bunch of money given to a local land conservancy to say, let's solve this. Let's start working on this. What do we need? And so at the same time that they're participating in the community, they're getting a tax write-off, and they have a mission to work on that seems very tangible and very important to not only that community, but to the broader climate change. That's my vision. Is like lots of times I would ask one of our guys that drove yellow iron, can we do this? And he said, all it takes is money, Greg.
We have another question over here. Is it on? Yeah. So this is relevant to that. I'm over here.
Oh, hi.
Hi. So you could use your sensors and have cattle graze on the mountains here on the pass to see how it impacts for fire suppression and keeping the ground from landslides and things like that, right? Wouldn't that be relevant for this area?
Yeah, just fire in general because of global warming. If you, like we just had I don't know, 90% of this ranch has burned once. And so fires, when you talk about an ecological disaster, too frequent of burns are an ecological disaster, just like too unfrequent are, like our forests are suffering from. But anyhow, now you just talk about bare ground, you talk about a lack of biodiversity, you talk about, and so fires, and then you change by 1 degree C over time, and fuels are ready to ignite. And they are going to ignite and ignite and ignite, and now we just have these things burning up, and the amount of heat that's coming off of it, let alone our breathing today here, or my bike riding, is being dramatically influenced. We don't do tour biking in August because you can't trust how much there's going to be. And we just got through putting out a fire in October on the ranch. By now, usually it's frozen down, but that little amount of 1 degree C, when you look at tables of ignition, and so we have used our information. We can tell how much biomass there is on the ground and where would you apply grazing or pre-mitigation. And we can say, this is the amount of fuel that will determine the flame length, which determines the rate of spread, which determines where you want to put your safe firefighting. And now that we're getting to where we think that we can put our stuff in the cloud and download it to your phone, then the authorized anyhow, the commander of fires can have that information in addition and say, where's a safe place? What do I do tonight? Because they're not familiar with this 1,000,000 acres over here or over there. They just show up. Excuse me.
You can get funding for that. We can help you.
Okay. I would love it because I think one of the best applications of our tools is basically how to help a firefighter not only get there after you just get there quickly. The next thing is, what is the actual on-site current conditions, and then with temperature and this and that and the other thing, we can show where is safe and where to start from and what's going to be that rate of spread there.
Greg, hopefully, I don't even know if you can answer this question too, but it is ironic to me to sit in here and look at all the light covers that are literally old brands around the room while we talk about this. But you and I have known each other for years, and the mountain towns piece is interesting because we have 540 folks that all want to make change. but I almost feel like we're in like I have an 11-year-old daughter, and it's like the middle school awkward dance of we're on one side of the room, and you got the ranchers on the other side of the room. We all want to dance, but we don't know how to cross the floor, right? Of like, this is great that you're here and stuff. How can I, for the city, I also manage a bunch of land, but it's also pretty surreal to me to drive from Park City to here. It's 5 hours, and you're driving across all this land that could be engaged too. So how can I cross the dance floor to the other side to find the ranchers that are interested in at least having the conversation? Again, I don't want to come in with a solution because they'll look at me of like I'm full of crap. How can I cross the dance floor to find the dance partners to help figure this out together?
Well, I can't do what you can do. I don't know how to. You all and your experiences are not part of mine. That's why I said, can we have these? We have weaknesses and we have strengths. Together, we can overcome that. I can help you, and others that I know like me can give you the authenticity and the credibility. Like I said, we've done 70, 80 million acres, and the ranch community is not that big. There's 32,000 permittees in the West. Most of the big ones I know after 50 years. But I have friends and other people that know them too. And so once they've gone through the smell test of knowing that the data is accurate and the prices are great enough for their risk and their capabilities, then it's onesie at a time. And when we humble ourselves to what you guys are capable of and vice versa, then all of a sudden you start eating at it. There's a point in which the scale really tips. And ranchers and farmers usually know to the penny what the cost of their fertilizer or something might be, and they are looking for that thing. What they lack now with this carbon trade is they know that they're not getting much of the pie, and with all the risk involved and what they hear about, and they see normal remote sensing stuff, and they know it doesn't look like their land because it's coarse and it's not based on trillions of bits of information. They are not willing to take on the risk yet. But to package up with people like myself and the trust that that's happened with a lot of these local land conservancies and weighing in on this, I think that's what it's going to take. But if you don't have the metrics to measure it, willing buyers and willing sellers can't get together. Because if I'm some rancher and saying, boy, I'm going to give you these environmental values, and you're thinking, wow, I represent China. I really would want water security. I got 1 billion people that are interested in that. And and then if you're on the other side and you go a rancher, well, but how many carbon securities are you trading? And that's like at a ranch, you have a cattle scale and it gets certified. We've spent 30 years building a scale that is trusted, that's precise, accurate, timely, and cost effective. And it's taken a long time to do that because the natural environment is so variable. To validate it over time and space is it's a big effort. And we feel like we've made a giant inroad into doing that. And with AI and other technologies coming on board, it's going to go faster. Well, who wants a beer?